Hi everybody, in today's video we're going to create some tile map layers with a nice tile set that we can use to easily and quickly draw terrain. Let me give you a real quick demo here of this. So you can come in here and just draw automatically connecting pieces of terrain, as well as these background layers and the little grass decorations that you see. And we'll do all that and a little bit more. Hey, Michael here. Throw on your favorite game dev tunes and join me as we build a 2D platformer in Godot 4 using GD script. All right, so picking up where we left off in the last video, what we're going to do with this one is we're just going to continue to set up a little bit more. We're going to create some tile sets that we can use to populate a basic level, okay? Because really a platformer, if we start building the character and there's no level for him to land on, then it's just going to be kind of silly, right? So let's go ahead and get started there. And to begin, I'm going to go ahead and close this scene that we kind of created originally that we were testing in. I'm going to delete it in the file system as well. And let's go ahead and create a new scene, and I'm going to rename this one. We can just call it level or whatever you want, okay? And we need to save it. And I'm going to go ahead and just save it in the root folder of my project. If you had a big game, at some point you're probably going to want like a levels folder. You could do that as well. But I'll just go ahead and save that right there. And let's add, and Control A is the shortcut for that, to our scene, let's add a TileMapLayer. You'll notice that there's a TileMap and a TileMapLayer node. And this tile map, as you can see, is marked for deprecation. They're going to remove it in future versions. So we'll just use this tile map layer. Go ahead and create that. And in here, we need to come over to the inspector and create a new tile set. Okay. Now this tile set, I want to go ahead and I want to save it because I want to be able to reuse this on other tile map layers. So I'll just come in here to my assets folder, tile set. And, you know, you can name it kind of whatever you want. I'm just going to call it like level 1 tile set, maybe, I don't know. Or maybe you could name it after the biome or the world, or, you know, if you're making a Marlowe game, then you might have different worlds, but whatever. So here's my tile set, level 1. We're going to leave most of these settings here to their default. So right now the tile shape is set to square. There are some other shapes if you want. I'm going to set the tile size to 32 by 32 pixels. Whoops, jumped way down there because that's the size of the tiles in the tile set that I provided. Okay, so if you've set everything up and you've got that in there, then that's the size you'll need. Now, if you've got your own tile set that you're using, just make sure that this tile size matches the grid size of each of your tiles. Okay, and let's go ahead and just save that again for now. And with this selected, if we come down here to tile set, you can see the tile sources for this tile set, and we don't have any yet. So let's go into our assets folder. And by the way, you can ignore this add-ons folder. That's a personal thing I use to get this little Michael thing in the corner. It also works with my little shortcuts that I press so you can see what I'm doing. But underneath the tile sets here, I'm just going to go ahead and drag tile set PNG into the tile sources. And you can see it says, hey, this texture was modified. Do you want to automatically create tiles? And I'm going to say yes. This is critical that before you do this, you have your tile size set properly. Otherwise, it's going to create tiles that don't match up. Okay, so there we go. Now you can see what it's done is it's brought this in and it's given me, you know, anything that has pixels in it, it's given me tiles. Okay, so that's nice and that's super handy. And so what we can do now that that's configured is with our tile map layer, if we switch over from tile set to tile map, then we can pick a tile and we can draw, okay? And obviously this is a really weird looking image if you're not used to this kind of a tile set. You know, you can select multiple and draw, but you're probably wondering how the heck do you use this tile set? And here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and erase that. Let's go back to our tile set, and in our tile map layer here, we wanna come over to terrain sets and add a new terrain set. Okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to create a couple different terrains. We're going to create one for this section on the left that's got the borders all around it, and then another one for the section on the right. Essentially, anywhere there's a green border, that's where the player would bump into. And so this other section over here are like background layers that Marlowe can run past and jump through. Okay, we'll set those up in a later video, but for now, we'll set up this first one here. So I'm just going to come down to my terrain set, and I created a new one. So let's see, the mode is match corners and sides, and that's great. There's two other modes here, and you'll see what that is in a second. This is a mode for matching the terrain, and what this means is we're going to set up a special set of tiles that relate to each other, so we can just draw with one brush, and it will automatically create and draw the corresponding corners, edges, or whatever based on the map, the tile map that we're drawing. Okay, and so underneath our terrains, let's add an element, and let's call this new terrain element something like, I'm just going to call it regular. I'm just going to leave it actually. Terrain is fine. Okay, get rid of that 0 that was on there. You can give it a color if you want to. You don't really need to, but this will help us differentiate them when we're drawing some of this stuff out in our TileSet editor here. And now that I've got this terrain, when I come back to my tile source and I'm working on this, what we can do is we can kind of configure each of these tiles. And we're going to set up a couple things in this video, right? We're going to add collision so that there's collision for our player when we add him in the next video. And we're also going to add this terrain set that I'm setting up. So let's start with the terrain set though, since that's where we are. And there's a couple ways to work with these, but what we want for the terrain set is to go over to paint, and then we select a property that we want to paint. And there's a lot of things in here. What we need right now are terrains. Okay, and now it says we're painting terrains. We need to pick a terrain set. Sounds like I'm saying terrain set. And then we need to pick a terrain. Okay, so now that I've picked these, you can see down here that I've got a little bit different appearance. And right now I have to kind of select which parts of this terrain are part of this terrain set. So I'm just going to go ahead and color in, click and drag, and just select all of these right here. Okay. And now that these are highlighted and bright, you can see when I hover over them, I get this little square that appears in different quadrants of the terrain. And what this is this is a map that we use to kind of paint the correlation between these. And the reason why this is laid out and looks so weird is because it's designed in a special way to give us all of the potential or possible corners or sections or shapes that can be drawn. And so I'm just going to click the center of this one right here. As you can see, this is like just a single tile piece. And let's go ahead and save that. And if I go back to TileMap and I am drawing here, there's tiles, there's patterns, and there's terrains. If I pick this terrain, you can see now I have a piece of terrain. I can select that and I can draw. Okay. Now this is only set up to work with that one piece of terrain. So let's go back. And what we can do is each of these terrain pieces has a center, and then we draw the edges that kind of connect them, right? And this shows for each piece of terrain, essentially what it's saying is like, okay, if we draw here and then there's a piece to the right, then this is the shape we want. This one, if we draw here and there's a shape to the left, a shape to the right, a shape to the bottom right, and a shape below, then this is the terrain we need to draw. Is that making sense so far? So if we draw one here and there's one to the left, to the bottom, and to the bottom left, then it'll draw this top right corner. Okay, so I'm going to go through really quick and just kind of fill this out. And you guys can follow along and maybe take a screenshot if you need to and try and get this terrain set up just like mine, and then you should be good to go. Okay, there we go. And a little quick note, if you're drawing, if you need to remove one, you can right click to remove it. I didn't say that before, but there we go. So you can see I've drawn this terrain thing here. And if I save this and then we go back to our level and go back to TileMap and we're going to draw with this terrain. Now, if I start drawing, you can see that it's automatically connecting the pieces in a way that looks pretty nice. Okay. And so that's how terrains work in this Godot system. Super powerful, super useful. And you can even get advanced terrains that interact with other terrains. And so, if you have grass that transitions to dirt, that transitions to water and so forth, you can set all that up. But obviously you're going to need a more complex tile map to be able to do that. Okay, and the one that we've got here for this project is pretty simple. They're two separate terrains that don't interact with each other. So if you didn't get this part working, then make sure that you get your map looking just right. And I'll make this large. Take a look at that. Set that up, and then you're ready for the next step. All right, so another thing that we can add on here is physics, and you can see when we have the tile set selected, when we've got our tile map here, or we could open it even from the inspector, we have physics layers, so let's add a physics layer. And what the physics layer will do is allow us to draw a collision shape that is used to detect collision and other physics type operations. And what we want to do is, I'm going to go ahead and say, we're going to turn off this collision mask. There's two collision settings, right? There's collision layer and there's collision mask. The collision layer tells the Godot engine which layer this physics object is on, and having physics objects on different layers is useful so that you can have some things avoid collision with other items, And then the collision mask is used so that if you have an object that's doing any kind of collision detection, it can say, hey, these are the layers I want to check for collision against. And so for this, we don't need a collision mask because this ground is not going to be the one detecting the collision. It's just going to be a layer. And I'm going to go ahead and change this so that it's not on layer 1. I'm going to use layer 5 for my ground. Okay. And this is just so that I can keep it separate in all my setups and I don't have things colliding with each other that I don't want to. Okay. If you put everything on collision layer 1, then everything will collide. And especially for a game like this, that's probably not always efficient or what you really want to happen. Okay, so we're going to put all of our hard type ground with edges all around it on layer 5. And then later on, when we set up the one-way jump platforms, we're going to put those on layer 6 because it's going to be a different type of collision. Okay, so that's what we'll use that for. But today we're just going to deal with this. So make sure you've got your physics layer turned on and enabled, and that you've got the collision layer set to layer 5. And then if you wanted to, you could add another collision layer here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Now, when we select our terrain, I want to go to tile sets first. And when we select this tile set and we are in this paint section, we can go here to the paint properties and change it from terrains to physics. And you can see there's physics layer 0. Okay. And so what we do here, this is pretty straightforward because basically we've got these blocks and you just paint them in, right? Say, okay, there's collision on these layers. These are blocks that the player will collide with. And voila. Now, really, man, I deleted this up here. Let's go ahead and draw something again. So let's go to TileMap, pick our terrain, and let's actually start maybe drawing a level. So I'm going to take this rectangle to start, and I'm going to draw like a big shape for the edge, another shape for like a bottom of the world. Yeah, we'll just make some simple platforms here. Maybe one like that. Okay, let's extend this. And then maybe there's a section where there's a piece up above that the player would bump into. Let's make it a little bit lower. Okay, so you can just go through and do whatever you want to create your level. And once you're done, we can kind of move on. Okay, so there's a basic level. And what'll happen here is if I'm looking at my tile map layer here, I'm going to go ahead and collapse the tile set. Underneath physics, there's an option for collision visibility. I'm going to change this to force show. So you can see that as I've drawn this, it's also added those collision shapes to my world, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. So that means we've got that all set up. Now, the last thing that I want to do after this is just add a little bit of fun and flair to our tile set so that we have more options to draw than just this one layer for the level. So we'll get that set up next. Okay, so what are the fun things that we want to add? If we look in our tile set folder, we've got like some background sprites, and we've also in our tile set, if you noticed, let's go to the tile. Let's see, let's select it real quick. Open that up. You can see that I've got down below like these angled tiles. Okay, so let's start by dealing with those, and we can draw those in, and then we'll get to the background elements as well. Now we need collision layers for these. So we'll paint some physics. We don't need to paint these as part of our terrain. These are just going to be tiles that we manually draw in when we need a slope, because there's no easy way to automatically determine if you need an angle. I mean, I suppose you could do that, right? But that's not what I'm going to do here. So let's look at the physics layer. And obviously, if I click to paint, this is not how I want the physics. But you'll notice in the left panel here, there are some controls. And I can actually just right-click or left-click and move, or right-click to get rid of that point. But before I do, I'm going to change my grid snapping to be 32, because that's how many pixels I have. That's going to make this be like pixel perfect in how it snaps. But I'm going to right-click to remove that so we get that nice angle. Then if I paint again, Boom. Now we've got that simple angle for that slope. Okay. And then obviously if I want this one, this slope is different. I got to drag this down. And there is a zoom in function here. Okay. So I'm just going to draw that slope. And then this next one is unique, right? We got to go back up to the top corner. And we need to add another point back in because this can have 4 corners again, and just paint that. And we want to just make sure that these lines are seamless. You know, if you had this one a little bit high like that, if I zoom in, you can kind of see that, right? It's kind of a pixel higher. That could cause some weird collision issues depending on how you're, whoop, I got to take this call. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. We had a tree removed today. You wouldn't believe how expensive it is to have a big tree removed, but you got to do what you got to do sometimes. Okay, so let's see, what was I doing? I just needed to fix that little slope there. And I'm going to go ahead and just paint in these other shapes. I think you understand how this works at this point, so you can follow along, but I'll speed this process up. I should say, actually, real quick, let me just interject in here, and then we'll speed up again. You can actually go to the eyedrop tool and pick one of these. So if you want to continue off a different shape, that's how you do that. And I guess last little trick here is there are some other operations, like you can press H to flip it horizontally, V to flip it vertically, and I think there's a rotate, I just don't remember. Rotate right is R and left is E. That might help make these a little bit quicker as well. All right. So I've got this all set up. I'm going to go ahead and save that tile map. And then just as an example, I'm going to go ahead and draw some of these slopes in here on my map. So if I go back to the tile map and select my, well, I don't need to select my terrain, do I? I'm on tile map. And I want to actually go back to tiles here, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and just select this slope as an example. And then I can come in here and actually, let me do this real quick. Let me go to my terrain and let me just draw. Nope, I got to get the draw in there. Okay, let me just draw what I want it to slope up to. Okay, maybe it goes here and then there. I'm not sure. Something like that. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to my tiles. The reason I drew these is I want it to cut out of it. It's not, when you draw with a shape over these tile maps, as you can see, it's just going to erase that terrain that was below, and it's not going to automatically kind of connect them like it did before. So, you know, for what it's worth, that's just kind of how you have to deal with it. And I'm just going to drop a couple shapes in there. So there we go. We've got a little bit of a slope. Okay. Now this tile set is missing. It would be nice to have a little corner piece that connects some of these in here a little bit more nicely. Okay. But that's something that you can go in and draw if you want to, you know, adopt this tile set and make it your own. You can do that. And there we have it. We've now got a section with slopes and looking pretty good. And again, if I come into my tile map layer and I go down to physics, let's see, yeah, expand it, and then just turn this on. You can see that it's got that nice sloping terrain now with the collision shapes that match. Okay. Okay, let's add a little bit more to this tile set. So if I look at my tile set here, I've got just this one PNG that I've already added, but let's go ahead and take this background and just drag and drop it. Well, that's not going to work right now because I'm on tile map. And honestly, this can get a little bit confusing. You just got to pay attention because they look very similar. So make sure you click on tile set. There we go. Now, if I click on this background image and drag it in here, I can add more PNGs and more tile atlases to this. So I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead and create the tiles. And you can see it created tiles out of my nice little hill and my little grass. I'm not going to create a terrain out of these because these are just simple things that I'm going to use to decorate and draw with. And also we're going to use some of these on the foreground. We're going to use some of them on the background. So if I'm looking at my tile map layer, and let's say I want to draw this piece of grass, you know, you have to make sure you're on the tiles section, not terrains or patterns, but just here on tiles. If I want to draw this piece of grass, this will work pretty good on just this layer because of the way these are set up, right? But if I were to draw one, you know, where it was overlapping, it's going to erase the layer below that. So let me just go ahead and undo that. That's not going to be too big a deal. I'm going to go ahead and just paint a few of these sections in here and use them how they're intended, you know, just give some decoration. to a little bit of these areas, just to make it look a little bit more lively, maybe. Just like so. But if I want to start drawing this hill, I want this hill to be behind my tile map. And that's obviously not going to work, right? But because we've created this tile set in a resource file here and saved it, if we make, I'm just going to say Control A and add a new TileMap layer. And I'm going to rename this one to be called TileMap. And then I'll just call it like underscore background maybe, so that I can tell what it is. I can just drag and drop this tile map on and assign it. And there we go. I've got my tile set and everything. I can just draw with it just like I could on the other one. So let's go ahead and use this to draw a background. And this is just kind of designed, right, to hold shapes like this. And actually one thing that's pretty cool, we've got this pattern section. If I take this little cursor and I click and drag and select, select that whole thing, and then I can drag it down here to my patterns, and voila. Now, if I want to draw with the pattern, I can just click back on the pencil, click the pattern, and I can just draw a few more of these. Offset the height a little bit differently. And we can even come in here and make like a skinny version of this, because this is set up to work with just 2 pieces wide, like this. Okay, in fact, let me just make it tall again. And I'm going to go ahead and select this and add this to my patterns as well. Okay, so now these patterns, if I were to go back to my other tile map layer, they're still here. I could draw with these on this one if I wanted to, right? Of course, it's going to erase the things behind it, but that's how that works. So let me just grab this skinny one and draw a couple things in here. And, a couple things to note. Right now, we've got these 2 layers. When you select a layer to edit, the other ones fade out. That's kind of the default functionality. If you want, you can come down here when you have the tile map selected, there's some options to not do that. So if you deselect this highlight selected tile map layer, then they're all full opacity, which might be nice if you're trying to make sure it looks good, but then it's hard to know which one's selected. You can also toggle the grid on and off. Okay, so if you don't want that grid. Now, one thing that you'll notice if we turn these on, this background is in front of the foreground. One way to fix that is just to drag it up the scene tree, and just like that. Another thing that we can do though is we can also come in here and under the ordering, we could take the Z index and we could give it a negative number, and that's going to just drop it back. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to control the stacking. And for things like a background, I like to put a Z index on there so it really pushes it far back into the background. And I'm going to go ahead and just like duplicate this layer real quick. And that was Control D was the shortcut I used. You can also right click and there's a duplicate option in here. But with this background too, what I'm going to do is let me first start by just erasing everything. Okay. That's one thing maybe I should have done. And now I can come in here and if I want to draw some overlapping shapes, I can. And actually I'm kind of intending these to be behind. So let me take both of these. Let me stick them like this. Stick the background. There we go. And there we go. That's how you can draw these interesting other elements. Now, some things that you can do and exercises you can take as you're working is you can come into this tile set. If you want to add more resources to it, you can. Like if you want to bring the clouds in, right? Then those can become different pieces of tile that you can draw with in your world. You could bring any other type of prop in that you want to, and then only need to assign collision shapes to the ones that you want the player to interact with in the future. But things like this background layer, we can just completely ignore a lot of those settings. All right, so as we wrap up here, if we try and run the game, it's going to need us to select a scene because we deleted that initial Node 2D scene that we created right in our previous video. So I'm just going to go ahead and say select current. And you're going to see that this is not working great because we're just seeing an arbitrary piece. Because as we drew, you can see where the camera view is. It's right here. So that's what we're seeing. But really, this level is going to come into play as we start building our character in the next video because he's going to need stuff to move around, okay? So thank you, everybody, for following along so far. Subscribe if you want to see the next videos as they come out. And go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you appreciate the content. It helps my channel grow. And as always, we'll see you next time.